Axner, Executive Director of the National Council of Jewish Women Cleveland. It's been a busy week here at NCJW. We launched the Strong Women, Powerful series just 3 days ago. The purpose is to lift up the diverse voices of women, bringing them front and center. Our hope is that these speakers will help you laugh, think deeper, and feel a little less isolated during these unprecedented times. Hopefully you've had a chance to tune in and hear from actress and comedian Susie Essman. Maybe you were inspired by Cleveland Cavaliers assistant coach Lindsay Gottlieb. Today, we are incredibly fortunate to hear from two very strong women, both of whom I have the pleasure of knowing, Dr. Lisa Damour and Dr. Suzanne Schneps. Dr. Damour is a psychologist, best-selling author, monthly New York Times columnist, and a regular contributor to the CBS News. She blends years of experience with the latest research developments to provide sound, practical guidance to children and adolescents, as well as their parents, teachers, and advocates. And I get to see this come to life firsthand as a parent of a Laurel student. Dr. Suzanne Schneps is a well-known clinical psychologist with over 30 years of experience in the field of psychology, working with children, teens, adults, and families. She has worked in community mental health centers and residential treatment programs, giving her a strong understanding of the impact of life situations on emotional well-being. She believes that each person and family needs a plan that is tailor-made to meet their needs and comes to life through support and guidance. These two experts are about to have a candid discussion about how to cope and manage anxiety during a time of social isolation and uncertainty, something we're all likely probably feeling on some level right now. No matter your age, we may all require a bit more empathy and support now. And I, for one, am very excited to hear from their expertise and guidance. There will be a Q&A following their talk. If you have a question that you wish to ask, you can type it in the chat below, and we will be sure to try to get to every question. Now, without further ado, it is my great pleasure and honor to introduce you to Dr. Suzanne Schneps and Dr. Lisa Damour. Let me unmute you.
Still, let's see.
Maybe you have to do it.
I don't think I have that kind of power. I'm trying.
No, she got it.
She got it. Okay.
Okay, I'd like to thank you, Mindy. Thanks for having both Lisa and me. I'd like to start with a little story. I have a friend, Max, and Max is a first grader, and his father got COVID. Mm-hmm. And he was then therefore isolated to the bedroom, and they had the rest of the apartment. And it was the first night, and his mom, Rebecca, says, you know, we're going to have some fun. We're going to see a movie. We're going to make it be a fun evening. I'll make popcorn, blah, blah, blah. And it'll be a new movie. It'll be great. And Max says, I don't want to see a new movie. I need to see a movie where I know the end. There's too much uncertainty, and I can't handle seeing a new movie. And he kind of laid it out for all of us. There's just so much uncertainty that all the things that are predictable give comfort and make us feel okay and safe. So the question becomes, what do we do with all this uncertainty? A couple of quick thoughts, and Lisa and I are going to go back and forth. A quick thought would be that it's important to focus on what we do know, not what we don't know. And there's so many things that we do know in a day. We know we're going to eat, at least we hope so. We probably know we're going to eat more than we thought we were going to eat. That's a separate story. we know who we might talk to on the phone. We know what kind of work we might do. We might know how much fun we're going to have doing homework with our kids. We know that there's probably going to be a few arguments, blah, blah, blah. One of the things that helps with uncertainty is to focus on what you do know, not so much on what you don't know. A second thought is to break it down into smaller parts. I really wish I knew what was going to happen in July. I am so beyond knowing what's going to happen in July, but I do know what's going to happen the rest of May. I'm pretty good with that. June, not so much, kind of going there. So to break it down, and many of us, I would have to include myself, are very long-term planners. I've been accused of knowing what's going to happen till I'm 100. Now I'm working on knowing what's happening in May. It makes it a way to deal with the uncertainty. I wanted to give a few thoughts because Mindy had asked us also talk about the social distancing. And I think the first thing that we need to know is that everybody does the social distancing a little bit differently. Everybody has the things that have felt okay to them or not okay to them. And we need to respect that everybody agrees with, well, most people agree with wearing a mask and with 6 feet. But where people have been comfortable being or with whom they've been comfortable being is often different. I think the piece that we're all struggling with now is we've kind of lived in a bubble. We've had our shelter in place and we all had control over what we could do and what we couldn't do and who we saw more. As that bubble is opening, it is a lessening of our control to some degree because we don't necessarily know which person's done what that we might be exposed to. I think in making some of those decisions, another important point and message to put out there is the idea of risk versus benefit. Mm-hmm. If I have a toothache, you really need to go to the dentist. They're open now, okay? You need to think of what's the risk versus the benefit of what it is that you're choosing to do. And I guess, and I think that Lisa will probably concur, a piece of that risk is your own mental health and figuring out what it is that will feel like a positive way to address your mental health. We've all had a lot of disappointments. We acknowledge those disappointments. But there's a really great word that we're all forgetting about, and that's fun. The other F word. And we need to look at how during this time we can have some fun. I mean, some of the things that kids and adults have come up with are absolutely positively awesome. It is so disappointing not to have a senior graduation. And yet, I don't really remember my graduation. And I am pretty sure that a high number of our graduating seniors will remember their graduation. It is so unique. One last thought, and I'm going to turn it over to Lisa, and we'll go back and forth for a bit. In terms of dealing with anxiety, this is one of those proven by studies kind of thing. We lessen that part of our brain that's anxious when we do something that's kind, when we give back to other people. And that's such a positive way to begin to deal with some of the anxiety. So focus on what you can do, not always on what you can't do. Lisa, your turn.
I love working with you, Suzanne. Suzanne's one of my favorite colleagues in the whole wide world, and we've been friends for 20 years. So I am going to actually pick up on your points and just do sort of my angle on those same points, because I think these are the big points. So on this issue of the uncertainty, here's another way to say exactly what you were saying. This came from, there's a guy at Vanderbilt in the psychology department named Bruce Compass, this wonderful guy, kind of late career psychologist. And I interviewed him for an article about managing chronic stress because he has spent his whole career studying kids, but this would apply to people of all ages, under persistently difficult situations. And he said, he was this great guy. And you know how like the longer you work, the more like it goes or boils down to the nuggets. He was like, Lisa, I've spent my whole career proving the serenity prayer, which is the let me, take good care of the things I can do something about and basically let go of the rest. And that's what he's found. And it's exactly what you're saying, that when things are this uncertain, you divide the world into two buckets. Something I can do something about, which is having an extraordinary sandwich at lunch, and something I can do nothing about, which is what the heck is this summer going to look like? And with the first one, you get all over it, you control it, you enjoy it, you make the most of the control you have. With the second, you actually have to practice acceptance. There are things I do not know and will not know until more data come in. I'm going to let go of it. I'm not going to ruminate. I'm not going to think about it all the time. If I can't stop myself, I'm going to go find a happy distraction. And one of the things, and this is the fun piece, it's not often that psychologists are like, okay, here's what you're going to do. You're going to not think about it. We're there. So you're going to feel better if you do not think about this all the time. And losing yourself in a movie, losing yourself in a TV show or a book, or going outside in nature, if you feel overwhelmed, find a way to absorb yourself in something that does not make you think about this, and that will help. In the stuff we can control, Suzanne, what you said about like knowing what May is going to look like, one of the things I have found important for myself and also for adolescents is to figure out what they can look forward to, because so much of what teenagers in particular or young adults look forward to is now either gone or up for grabs. And so I have been pressing them, and then also in our own family life, to put things on the calendar that we can look forward to, because that's an important part of life. Like, what is this thing out there that I'm kind of excited for? Right now, it is picking up On the Rise on Saturday mornings. That's our thing we look forward to. I have put in an order every Friday night. I go to On the Rise on Saturday morning. I come home with our pastries and our 2 cookies for later in the day. And that's really working for us. It is small, it is reliable, no one can take it from us, and it marks the week in a way that we need help with. And it is not what we want, but it is good enough. And I think there's a lot of sort of, we wish it were different, but it's not, so how can we make the best of where we are? Another thing I want to think about a little bit with the graduations and the losses and the creativity and the incredible things we've seen kids come up with, I think sometimes it's hard to have empathy for how upset young people are about the prom or the graduation. And like Suzanne said, you're like, graduation's like 35 seconds on a stage, right? Or prom is so overrated, and we know that. But for them, they've been daydreaming about these things for months, if not years. And certainly, in January, when it's like so disgusting, they're like, what am I going to wear to prom? And they're thinking about it. And so now these things have sort of been locked in ice as like this perfect vision of what I lost, And so I think the losses feel big. And yet we're watching them be able to stomach them and then be creative about substitutes. But if you're feeling like, really, kiddo, like you're still grousing about this, like people are dying of COVID-19, I would try to remember there's a lot of daydreaming and fantasy and excitement about what's ahead. And I think a lot of that just got swept out of kids' lives. And so their sadness, it's bigger than prom, it's bigger than graduation, it's all the stuff they were excited about. Let's talk for a moment about anxiety and helplessness. So what Suzanne said about, if you're feeling anxious, go do something for someone else, go take care of someone else. I think that's brilliant advice. And the spin I would put on it is, because one of the worst feelings in the whole wide world is helplessness. And one of the things we have been sort of served heaping proportions of lately is helplessness. And one of the ways we check against helplessness is we go find ways to make ourselves useful. So I think that's valuable. The other thing I want to say about anxiety, and Suzanne, you'll appreciate it took me a little while to come around to this view on anxiety. It's a really biological phenomenon. It is a really primitive, rooted in like our deepest caveman biology phenomenon. It makes our heart rate go up. It makes our breathing get really quick and uncomfortable. It makes our stomachs churn. It makes us lightheaded. And I think that aspect of it can feel really out of control. And so I want to spend 30 seconds on why breathing works, because it's much more powerful than I used to want to admit. Because to me, somehow the primitive nature of it, I was like, no. It's like, let's have a sophisticated thought. Anxiety is not sophisticated. So when you are having a powerful anxiety response, your amygdala is telling your body to go into overdrive so that you can fight or flee from a threat. It is uncomfortable, it is unpleasant, it is a primitive, quick system that just gets firing off. You can override the system with slow and deep breathing. And the reason breathing works is that there is a network of nerves all over the surface of your lungs that are constantly monitoring how deeply and slowly you are breathing and communicating that information to your brain. They are there in case you are suffocating, to alert your brain that you are suffocating and tell your brain to tell your body to start freaking out. When we become amplified with anxiety and our heart goes up and our breathing gets quick and shallow, it's unpleasant. When we deliberately override that with slow and deep breathing, we are hacking into a nervous system that is in place where our lungs are monitoring our breathing. And when we breathe deeply and slowly, our lungs get the message, never mind, everything's okay. They send the message to the brain, which turns off the anxiety alarm. So breathing, it works for a reason. And we just have to acknowledge that anxiety is primitive, and then we have to get back in the driver's seat with it. All right, what else are you thinking, Suzanne?
I'm thinking that you're right on target with the anxiety. And one of the things I was thinking as you were saying that was, we don't want to underestimate a couple of the things that we all know. One, exercise is really helpful. It works for the body. It helps. And being outdoors really helps. And that's something we can control.
Mm-hmm.
We can make choices to be able to do that. Another thing that we're seeing a lot of differences in what it used to be is sleep, a very valuable commodity to dealing with life and anxiety. And just doing some of the breathing that Lisa has just suggested is another really important way to help your body to calm down, to get to sleep. Another just quick little tidbit about what sometimes helps at night, once you've done it, if the breathing and relaxing your various limbs doesn't help and your mind is still racing, we all find things to be really much bigger at night than we do during the day. The manvia plants that I ordered that I thought wound up being way too tall, you know, it was really enough already, like I could go to sleep. It was like not the end of the world, but at night they feel bigger. The brain works in another way that's helpful once you've calmed it down. You can interrupt all the things you're worried about if you do some things that are sequential. That's the old-fashioned count the sheep. Well, I don't know. Personally, I think that's the most boring thing in the whole world. So you can create other sequential kinds of things. You can plan for your birthdays for the next 50 years, because that's an order. One happens right after the other. You can, as long as it has an order, it helps to distract you. And of course, you never have to finish the task because the object is to fall asleep. Lisa?
Okay, so on that sleep thing, I'm hearing a lot of stuff about sleep, both from the standpoint of people having trouble falling asleep, very, very intense nights of dreaming. And I think a lot of it is that our days are so intense that we are still processing through the night, and it just, you know, it's pretty powerful. But that idea of being wound up and unable to fall asleep, it's put me in mind, and I've thought about this a lot lately, of how important it is to try to rinse your brain a little before you get in bed. If you've had a day where you're really feeling pretty wound up and feeling pretty maybe overwhelmed by the news or overwhelmed by an interaction that happened. And the thing I've been thinking about a lot lately is when I was in my postdoctoral fellowship, you know, and you know how you're seeing like 10 patients a day and it's really intense and you're still a pretty young clinician and it's a lot to take in. And I happened to live very close to the clinic where I worked, and I worked late into the evening. So I would get home around 9:30 or 10, and just be absolutely cooked. But if I got in bed at that point, I would lie there in just a spinning state for another hour and a half to 2 hours at least. So I was a poor graduate student, as all graduate students are and should be. And I had the cable package that was called the Lifeline cable package at that time, which meant you could get 4 channels. And that because that was all I could afford. So I got the 3 major networks, and the golf channel was the 4th channel. I have no idea why. I have no feelings about golf. I don't play golf. I'm not interested in golf. I don't have any, good, bad, or otherwise. I found that the golf channel was my salvation. So I would come home, get myself some food, and sit there and watch the golf channel for about 30 to 45 minutes every night. The greens, the announcer's calm voice, activity, but not too much, was just enough to wind me down, distract me from my day, and put me in a different place to go to bed. So do Suzanne's sequencing thing, or find your golf channel. Like, everybody has to find their golf channel. And it's just, and that idea, like, sleep is not a switch you flip. It is a destination where you arrive after a thoughtful sequence of events. So it's either, you've got your normal routine, or for me, my routine included the golf channel, but you can't just go from full blast wound up to get in bed, fall asleep. That's not actually how humans work.
So let's talk about what probably is not the right thing to be doing before bed, which would be watching all the news about COVID-19. This is not helpful because it gets you all stirred up and gets you all worried and concerned, and you focus on one piece of it. So that's the opposite of what you want to be looking into to watch at this time right before bed.
That's the opposite of the golf channel, basically.
It's the opposite.
Here's something else, Suzanne, as I sort of think, like, where does this really boil down? Like, what does this really boil down to? And where I'm at right now, and what I'm sure you're finding, is this thing moves so fast. We are shifting our understanding, and our idea of what buffers it changes very fast. My preoccupation for a few weeks now has been coping. And the way I'm thinking about it, and I'm sure you are too, is, okay, when the going gets tough, we all start coping, right? We're all coping all day right now. But there's 2 kinds of coping. There's negative coping and positive coping. Negative coping, okay, coping because it works, you feel better. Negative because it's problematic over time, are things like cutting people off, right? Like, people talk about feelings. If I don't talk to people, I don't have to talk about feelings. Misusing substances as a way to manage distress. Junk habits, right? Maybe getting in bed with your phone and scrolling. Eating nothing but comfort foods, not being active. And being cranky with people, right? So I feel cranky and I'm going to manage it by just, spreading it all around. Positive habits are things like emotional connection, finding the right people who make you feel better. What I call happy distractions. So what I mentioned, like, you need to take the edge off, but do it with Tiger King. That's going to be your answer, or something so absorbing you can think of nothing else. Really good self-care, what Suzanne described. And then, of course, doing things for other people. So for me, this is the great divide. And then, of course, I always pick it up, as you do too, like through the parenting lens. Okay, parents, like, this is your moment to show kids what coping looks like. And you can talk to them about coping, but better than that, you're going to model the coping you want. So I could come down from the 3rd floor of my house where I am after a day of Zooms, and I could be like, oh, that was a long day. Where's my wine? Or I can come down and say, that was a long day. Who wants to go on a walk around the block with me? And I want us to really think about what we are doing in these moments to show kids how we manage under distress conditions. And it's terrible that we are all faced with distress at the exact same time. There are some opportunities built into that.
And I am sure that your darling daughters, and they are darling, I can attest, really loved having a chance to go out for the walk. And that's where the creativity comes in, because as a parent, I think particularly the younger the kid, it's like, well, what can we do to make life feel a little more exciting? And you can go for a flashlight walk. Kids think things like that are just so cool. And so it's important to come up with some novel ideas. I have heard of some, things that, and I guess they have ideas. The kids have ideas. It's a chance to listen and to give them a chance to talk about things. And I think, Lisa, when you say, you can push away all the feelings, I think it's a chance also to model how you talk about feelings, and that it's okay to talk, and you don't have to be happy every single second. The thing that I think kids, well, actually, I think grown-ups too, Lisa, have a hard time remembering is feelings change. Just because this feels so anxiety producing now, so overwhelming, the feeling will change. And I think it's important to communicate that very fact to kids and to remind ourselves that feelings change.
They do. There's been two kind of truths. I mean, it's interesting under stressful times, like you really kind of go, you get down to the studs on stuff. Like what do we really know in psychology? What do we really want families to know and people to know? And one thing I've been saying to anyone who will listen is, okay, let's be clear on what the definition of mental health is. It is not that people feel calm and happy all the time. It's that you have the right feeling at the right time and the capacity to manage it. Full stop. So you should be anxious, you should be worried, you should be uncomfortable. Your kids, if you've got young kids, are going to feel this way too. That is evidence of your abundant mental health. You work as you should. The matter is going to be how you manage it. The other thing that I want parents to know, especially, and I think, Suzanne, this is sort of I think sometimes the unspoken part of when a parent's really worried about their kid being upset. I want parents to know it does not damage or harm children for them to be emotionally upset. I think our culture has become so anxious about discomfort. There's this, I think, truly often unspoken belief that if a young person becomes overwrought, they'll somehow be harmed in the process. And that's not true. That is not true. We are all built to withstand emotional distress. We all have mechanisms that help us to buffer it, to find our way through it. Painful emotions are part of life. Getting comfortable with that idea is a huge gift to you and your kids. Don't be frightened of your child being distressed, and don't be frightened of your distress. Feelings change. We are built to withstand them.
And don't feel that you always have to have the answer to why they're stressed. Sometimes, even in COVID-19 days, they're simply stressed because their brother or sister took their toy or knocked down the tower, or they didn't get the grade they hoped for from a teacher, or somebody sent them a text that was not what they hoped for. We still have many of the routine things that get kids upset. Actually, adults too, don't you think, Lisa?
Absolutely. I mean, if I'm, feeling cranky, it may very well be something that came up in a work meeting, that has, could have come up in a work meeting at any point. I think what's hard, this is the thing that's hard, and I've been trying to figure this out a little bit. We've lost a lot of space in our lives. Like we're all on top of each other physically, and then also work and home are not actually so distinct anymore. So then I think about like, how do we start to insert those spaces back? Because if you think about it, like if something difficult happens at work, you have to drive, back to your house and back to your people to, kind of get it out of your system a little bit. So I think there's some of that we need to sort out a little bit. And I am interested also in us sort of making more formal that we take distance from one another in a family. That if there's a lot of people in the house together, that I would suggest that parents and kids start considering, especially older kids, that maybe one day a week, like people just get to do their own thing and there's no expectation or obligation besides like maybe seeing each other at dinner. I think that when we're all in the house together, there can be the sense of it's disloyal if you're not participating in family life. We got a lot of family life going on right now. Like a little privacy might make that family life more fun when we do it.
We need to have social distancing at home sometimes.
Yes,
everybody needs their own space and their own room.
Yep, and
Mindy,
no hard feelings.
Mindy, this is a perfect opportunity to open it up to some questions.
So thank you. This is wonderful, amazingly valuable. Not that I doubted it for a second. Got great questions for you. Let's start with one from Catherine, which was sent out to the panelists. Anxiety about the opening of the world. So there are some people that are going out in the world, exercising or walking, being socially distant, but maybe haven't even stepped out to a CVS or a grocery store. And now the governor is saying, okay, we can start to lift up these sanctions, and it's acceptable to do things that it wasn't before. How do you manage that anxiety? Because not everybody is going to wear a mask. And how do we deal with that?
So first of all, I think you have to decide whether or not you want to do some of those things. You don't have to. And you need to do them one step at a time. You know, it's kind of like the therapy of having to do something gets you more comfortable. So it's doing a little teeny step at the very beginning. So you haven't done anything. Probably you're best off to try to go for a distance walk with a friend, okay? Because that'll feel more comfortable. Secondly, as you go out, if you don't feel comfortable, then don't go. Don't do that unless you have to, because there are going to be some have-tos. But you do get some choices. And, you know, I did get gas for the first time. And I don't know, I messed it all up and I had to do it again as I'm wiping down the pump and I'm wiping down the card. Okay, but you know what? I could do it again. Okay, because that repetition starts to help and starts to help to feel comfortable. Lisa, add to it.
So first thing, you know, going off of what Suzanne said, avoidance feeds anxiety. We've all been told to avoid, you know, sort of state sanctioned avoidance. And now they're saying, okay, now go back into the world. Well, or in some ways, that means our anxiety is going to be higher about doing things we've done because we've been avoiding. And like Suzanne said, often the solution is baby steps. As you baby step your way in, if you feel your anxiety getting very high, what you want to watch out for is the question of whether it's irrational. And when we think about what constitutes irrational anxiety, there's an enormously simple definition. We are overestimating the risks and we are underestimating our ability to manage those risks. So you want to sort of think through, am I, you know, is it really as dangerous as I imagine? And am I as helpless as I feel? Okay, so on the helpless side, I was on a call yesterday with a really smart physician, and she said, look, the formula for contracting COVID-19 is very simple. It's exposure times time. How much you are exposed to and how long you are exposed to it. So what you want to do to minimize your risk, I'm not a physician, I'm just repeating what she said, is if you are, you know, very small doses, if any at all, for very short periods of time. She's like, outdoors is fabulous. Outdoors at a distance is fabulous. Like the doses, even if they're around, they're going to be minuscule and very, very brief. She's like, indoors, longer conversations, people in close quarters, then you're starting to up exposure and time. So as you think about like, what can I do to minimize the risk? Think about exposure and time. And then the other thing is, it can be things like, I'll go to the store really early so that it's fairly empty. So if somebody else is not managing social distancing, I have room to work. And that's, I think, what a lot of people are doing, just so they feel some degree of control. Given that we're going to be in situations we can't control fully, but that doesn't mean we can't control them adequately to really do a lot to minimize our risk.
I think that's very, very helpful. So I have a couple of questions about sleep that have come up. One is it true that being on any kind of technology right before bed disrupts sleep or hinders it? That's the first question. The second question is, what do you do with the teenagers that are sleeping till 3 o'clock in the afternoon because it's, you know, maybe it's their way of dealing with this uncertainty or even some of the sadness of what's happening? But when does it become an issue beyond that? And how do you motivate them to get them up earlier?
Mm-hmm. Suzanne, which one do you want?
You can start. I'll feed off here.
Okay. All right. With regard to technology and sleep, 14 different ways is the answer to the way in which being on technology disrupts sleep. Number one, you've heard this before, the light coming off of technology uniquely suppresses melatonin. So if you were tired and then you look at your phone, now you're not tired anymore. The content on your phone will keep you awake, right? If you're scrolling, if you're looking at the news, you're going to be upset. If you're looking at social media, I call that a slot machine. Sometimes what you see on social media is like cute and funny and adorable. And sometimes somebody posted a news article that you're like, right? So you don't know what you're signing up for when you look through social media. If you have your phone in your bedrooms, which you should not have and your kids should not have, now your body's confused about what your bedroom for. Is this where we do leisure or is this where we do sleep? So get the phones out of the bedroom, in my world, 24 hours a day if you want to sleep well in your bedroom. We have basically 15 other versions of those studies about why you do not want technology right before sleep, and we have 0 studies saying it's a good idea to have technology anywhere near sleep. So I would shut it down at least a half hour, if not longer, before you want to go to bed. Teenagers staying up late at night. Suzanne, I want to hear what you have to say about this. I'm just going to say one thing. I think sometimes a piece of it is they want privacy because they've lost all privacy during the day. And so their thing is, between 10 and 1 or 10 and 4, that's when I live my life without my parents in my hair all the time. And then I go to bed at 4 and I'll catch them at 3 in the afternoon.
Okay. I am not that worried about it. Okay. Because the bottom line is we got a lot of things to worry about right now. Some of the things are different during this time, and we will have different expectations later. They are staying up later. My favorite was when I was telling somebody what a great idea it was. One of the kids drove to see the sunrise over the lake, and wasn't that exciting? And they said, they were up so early. I said, up so early? They never went to bed. It was just a chance to do something different, and it was totally safe. It was actually a very good idea. What I'm concerned about with teens with sleep is if it's too many hours. And I have adjusted what I consider too many hours during this time. Anything oversleeping more than half the day, I'm concerned. It's too much time to be sleeping. But their clocks are different. They're looking for the privacy. They're looking for the fact of when their other friends are up to chat with them. And there is not a bona fide reason to get out of bed at 7 o'clock to get to school, because half their school stuff can be done at any time they choose. So I think it's more doing two things, focusing on that it's not too many hours of sleep, okay? And they might be making up for all those years when they didn't get enough sleep. That's, another piece. And the other part that I would, be clear with my teen on is this is how we're doing it now. But when we're not in a pandemic mode here, our rules are different. Your thoughts?
One way I think to have a relatively successful conversation with a teenager about this may be to say, okay, let's talk in terms of negotiables and non-negotiables. So non-negotiables, you can't sleep more than 12 hours a night. If you are, I'm worried about you. And non-negotiables, you need to be helping out around the house. Like, I'm going to give you some things that are yours to do. You need to be on top of your schoolwork. And you need to be, a pleasant enough member of the family when you're awake and we're awake. The negotiables, when you sleep, like, I'll let that one go. And I'm letting it go and attaching it to it so long as, we're meeting these other, basic expectations that have to do with being, doing right by yourself and doing right by the family.
So let's look at another age group. Parents who could fall into many different categories, but particularly I'm now a caregiver at home, potentially full-time. I am working, full-time, and I have young children, and I don't want them to have all this screen time because that's what we've always thought. Kids shouldn't have all this screen time. Doesn't that make me a bad parent? And now you're dealing with the guilt of, wait, I'm a bad parent because my child or children are on the computers too much so I can get things done during the workday. Thoughts?
Well, go ahead, Lisa.
I feel like both Suzanne and I are going to send you an iPad. Like you're gonna do. So go ahead, Suzanne, and then I know we think the same thing here.
Well, I think you all saw that we're shaking our head. Okay, again, the rules are different now. Okay, number one, in terms of how much screen time they have, the only way these kids have to connect to friends is on screens. You know, they do house party. You know, they're trying to. Even the little kids are wanting to do these things, so they have some social time, and it's set up very challenging. Here you're supposed to be a working parent and you're working at home, and here you have a first grader, a second grader, a third grader, and they cannot function totally independently doing their schoolwork, so they're watching a movie. I'm more concerned with what they're seeing. Okay,
Yeah.
that to me is the bigger issue, what they're seeing. And the rules are going to be different after the pandemic. We're going to go back to less screen time. But I think that we need to realize that, that's not a bad parent. That's a good parent. They're trying to provide for their mental health. There was a wonderful superintendent who, by the way, never signed his name, so I don't know who it was, who wrote this great little deal about how what's the most important now is kids' mental health. The teachers will take care of what it is that they missed. They're trained to do that, and they're going to make up for things. And you have to have a home that feels as calm as possible. And when you're on an important call, you need to be able to maybe have them watch a movie. Somehow it reminds me of the time when my kids were young, and you couldn't do this anymore. And my two girls were very young, and I was on a work call, and they were fighting, and I was really embarrassed. So I said, I have to get off the phone because I'm babysitting some neighbors' children, and they're having a hard time. You can't do that now. They know it's just your kids.
That's really funny. Okay, so I want to just underline what Suzanne said. It's more about what they're watching than how much, right? I mean, the variety of what's available digitally is so wide. I mean, so they might be watching fantastic educational stuff, or really funny and adorable stuff, or connecting with friends in a meaningful and powerful way that's good for them, or they could be watching terrible, violent, sexual junk and getting into fights online. These are two different universes. So as long as they're in this universe, you don't need to worry so much. The other thing I want to bring to bear here is some of my favorite research in all of the universe of stress, which has to do with daily hassles. And this is this to me, when I came across this research, it really was game changing for me. So these very smart researchers, about a decade ago, looked at this question of okay, wait, when a horrible event occurs, maybe a hurricane in a community or, COVID-19, is it the event itself that does people in, or is it the cascade of daily hassles that are released as a result of the event that really get to people? So they looked at people 6 months after a hurricane that hit a whole community. They quantified the daily hassles between the hurricane and the 6-month point, and it was the daily hassles that drove the stress levels at 6 months. So you needing to work when your 3-year-old takes a short nap, or you not being able to get eggs, or you taking care of an elderly parent while you're also trying to get other stuff done, they may each by one feel small. But what this research showed is, no, this is actually where the rubber hits the stress road. And you have to do a lot to protect yourself from the daily hassles. So the first thing you do is you honor them. You don't say, why am I getting so upset about the short nap? There are people dying of COVID-19. Yes, people are dying of COVID-19. It's the short nap that is getting to you today, and it counts. It really counts. And then if a screen reduces your daily hassles, that will reduce your overall stress. And for me, Suzanne, and all the stuff, there's been so much writing that we've read, right? I love that thing from the superintendent. The thing that stuck with me is somebody wrote, when kids look back on this time, what they're going to remember is how it felt at home. And that just really has stayed with me. So if your child is watching an extra dose of PBS Kids, and you are feeling relaxed and getting your work done as a result, and so your cortisol levels are not through the roof and you can be more fun when you're done, that's the memory your child is going to have. That's what you're going for here.
So anxiety sometimes leads to guilt. There's I think a continuum of guilt that people are feeling today. Some is one end where you can't visit a elderly parent in a nursing home, or a grandparent can't go babysit to relieve their son or daughter to be with their grandchild because they're at a greater risk of so how do we protect ourselves and manage the guilt that we're experiencing from these situations?
Well, it's kind of interesting that we're using the word guilt when the rules would say you can't, okay? Because guilt really comes from when you have a different choice and you cannot go visit the person in the nursing home. So the question really then needs to be answered in a different way. What can we do about the things that we're disappointed, sad, wish we could do, make us feel badly? And it's coming up with some of those. I mean, I've seen wonderful signs that people have held up at the nursing homes and, that seem great, sending cards, doing FaceTime, and yes, many of them don't know how to do it, but somebody at the nursing home does know how to do it, and they're more than willing to help to be able to do it. When you talk about the grandparent that wants to be able to do something, there's talking. It's a nice thing to do sometimes. People like to be listened to. I've heard of a talent show that was put together, just to be silly. There's you can play games, and to do different kinds of things. But I think that it's recognizing that guilt comes from when you really have a choice. And some of these things, health is always first. And some of these things just aren't going to be healthy to do, even as the state opens up.
Actually, I want to pick up on that last little thing, the state opening up, especially with teenagers. We are having to point out pre-COVID that just because something's legal doesn't mean it's safe. We have to point that out a lot. Mm-hmm. Cigarettes are legal, tanning beds are legal, there's a lot of stuff that's legal that is actually not good for you. And so if you find yourself having some friction with a teenager around, state says we can do it. You can be like, oh, this is in the bucket of legal but not safe. So we'll have our own rules as a family. Just in terms of how we connect and how we take care of one another when we have to use remote mechanisms, one thing that has been quite surprisingly and wonderfully successful in my family is that my 80-year-old dad in Denver now has a book club with my 9-year-old daughter. She is into a series, and we sent him the series, and he reads, and every week they get on Saturday, and they are the cutest thing you've ever seen, where they talk through this book that they are both reading. It has worked beautifully. So much so we might even keep it in place when things go back to normal. So I think a lot of connecting and managing right now is getting really creative and not just thinking, oh, I wish we could do it the way we always did it. Well, what are we going to do instead?
Yes, I've become an expert at game pigeon and being able to play games, while, you can FaceTime, you don't see the person, then you can play the game. You can have a house party and play a game with somebody. You can play charades that way.
Love it.
Do we know what the long-term psychological impact is going to be on this whole situation?
On kids or everybody?
Everybody. I imagine that it's going to be different depending on the age groups. But what are your thoughts on that? I probably nobody on this call has been around for a pandemic before. Well,
let me start by saying we don't know. I don't think we should assume it's going to be all bad.
Mhm, I agree.
One of the things I was sort of daydreaming about this morning was, all of the ways in which pain fosters growth, which is something that's hard to talk about, but I think it's important to talk about. That we do have data showing that when people go through extraordinarily difficult periods and are able to weather it, they're more resilient in the face of new difficulties. So certainly for young people, but I think also for some of the rest of us, you get through this, nothing else looks that bad. And you get to keep that durability and that shift in perspective, hopefully for a really long time. I also think about the ways in which, if a relationship becomes really close, it's often around pain and difficulty, right? That the people that we can turn to and really talk honestly about how this is and how this feels, and use their trusted, kind of space with them and have a confidant, that's going to be a different and stronger relationship after the fact. And so and even with our kids, like if we get into a fight with a kid, what we know from the data is if you go back and you're like, I really regret what I said, and I spoke to you in a way I should not have, and I let me try to walk through what I think your perspective was on that, and can you do the same for me? That's a growth-giving interaction, and actually more growth-giving than if you're just playing a game and having a good time together. So I want us to be open to the not just silver lining kind of Pollyanna aspect of this, but the reality that we continue to document in psychology that difficulty is growth giving, and we can count on that.
And Lisa, when you say we obviously don't know, but what we do know is trying to make sure that the time that you have is considering your mental health. That's going to be the most important part that we can do. And there are going to be also growth things that happen. That I can now press pause on the TV. I didn't know how to do that before. That'll be with me forever. It's a great opportunity. And there are going to be some of those, but it's going to be how everybody handles the time. And that doesn't mean, as Lisa said so well, it is not that it's perfect, it's that it's discussed. So we don't know the long-term effects, but we do know that the more you take care of your mental health needs during this time, and the more that you talk about how you feel, and the more that you focus on what's important, the more likely that there will not be strong negative mental health effects.
So I'll end with one more. Somebody asked Lisa if you would repeat the phrase that was overestimating risk and underestimating.
So the definition of irrational anxiety is overestimating risk and underestimating your resources to address that risk. That's the way we want to think about it. So yes, there are risks, but are there things you can do to mitigate them? And if you want to feel better, you're going to focus on the things you can do to mitigate them, which is not nothing.
Any concluding words beyond these amazing words of wisdom that I think all of us can take some nuggets from and find such value moving forward?
Look to have some fun. Like today, I had some fun being able to work with my colleague, Lisa. We had a good time, as you could probably tell, back and forth. Look to have some fun. It helps mental health. It's just a simple and very important thing to do.
I have fun, so much fun. I think the other thing, when I think about what NCJW does and all that it does for the community and all of the outward efforts that are so much, central to the mission of NCJW, I feel like you're so well positioned to get through this well, because getting through this well is actually going to be about helping others. That single act is so therapeutic on so many levels that what a time to already be part of a structure that is so generous in its spirit and so mindful of the uneven distribution of resources in our area, and you're already plugged in to what will turn out to be one of your main sources of sustenance through this, which is a community of people who are working on behalf of other people. So good job. Good job.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I don't think I could have said that better myself, and it's a perfect segue to say thank you both for being here, for helping us address some of these issues. I just want to briefly take this moment, since Lisa kind of put it out there, to urge you, if you have not rejoined for the coming year, to renew your annual membership. It is going to be more needed than ever, the community dollars that we are able to raise. We actually started an emergency relief fund to be able to provide programs and activities for the community that we identify that are happening because of COVID-19. We're approaching the end of our 125th year, our anniversary year, that is constantly working to benefit vulnerable women, children, and families in our community, and we don't plan to stop. The needs are going to be greater, they might be different, but we want to be there to help in any way we can. And sometimes it's helping our own community, our members that are here today that are benefiting from the programming that we are able to do with Suzanne and Lisa as a perfect example. So the information is online. Just go to our website, ncjwcleveland.org. The cost for membership is triple high, so $54. We have some other specials for our seasoned seniors. That's a tongue twister if I've ever heard one, and our young advocates. And if you join now, it's good through June of next year, 2021. So please stay safe, but stay connected. And check our weekly updates and our social media sites for any upcoming webinars and events. If you have ideas for people you want to hear from, let us know. And, you know, hopefully we don't invite Lisa and Suzanne back, but if things go on much longer than expected, we might need a little refresher.
We'll be here with long hair.
Right.
It's already long.
Yeah, it's getting a little shaggy around here.
So thank you all for attending, and thank you, Suzanne and Lisa, again.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.